Hello and welcome to Why Medics Matter, a podcast for doctors by doctors in association with Doctors Training. We are your hosts. I'm Dr. Amie Burbridge.
And I'm Dr. Simon Fraser.
And today we are joined by the fantastic Dr. Vijay Nayar. He's a GP and he's here to talk to us about all things communication. So Vijay, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Amie and Simon. So as you said, I'm a GP. I'm a GP in Bedford. I've been a GP now for over 35 years. But I've also been involved in medical education for most of that time. I was previously in the east of England as the primary care dean. And during that time, have been involved with supporting residents from all kinds of backgrounds.
Can I lead off a question? What are the challenges faced by international medical graduates?
Thank you, Simon. And just to take you up on that term, because I think language really matters. So I think international medical graduates is a term that we refer to those who have qualified outside the UK and outside the EU. But I think I prefer the term non-UK graduates. So that will encompass all those who have qualified outside the UK. Then we're talking about the same group of people, because I think the challenges faced by them are by and large the same. So non-UK graduates face numerous challenges coming to work in the UK for the first time, within the healthcare system for the first time. And just as we would face challenges if we had to go and work somewhere abroad, I mean, that would terrify me. But the thought of coming to work in a new country, a new culture, faced by new healthcare systems, ways of working, faced with policies and procedures you may not be aware of, good medical practice from the GMC, what do the colleges do, what does a BMA do, all these things are kind of firing at you, and adapting to a new culture and way of living. And then on top of that, you add in that complexity of maybe a language that's different. So if you're not a native English speaker, so you might have learned English, and that might be your lingua franca, and you've learned your medical education in English, but that will be different from being a native speaker, because English is full of nuances and euphemisms. I mean, I'll give you an example. You know, if I say, that's not bad, that means that's quite good. But if you're not a native speaker, you'll interpret that literally. That's not bad. So it's good. Is it bad? I'm confused. That's quite good. Is that good? Is that bad? It's not quite good, is it? It's quite good. So these little things can actually make a difference. We know ourselves, if someone says, oh, I must have you around for dinner one day, means you'll never get an invite for them ever again. So, you know, these euphemisms are weird.
I'm still waiting for my invite, Fiji.
Yeah, so that's it. So you can understand how euphemisms are like. And the thing with communication issues is that they can make it a bit harder to get that shared meaning. And it can lead to, and I've seen this, communication breakdown with patients, with peers, with your supervisors. And I think that can be a real problem. And, if you don't get a joke, it might make you appear that you don't have a sense of humor, or you don't quite get what's being talked about. It makes you appear a bit awkward. And my biggest worry is that people ascribe knowledge and intelligence to your level of English working in this country. So if your English isn't quite up to it, if you have an accent on top of that, and then patients are ascribing a level of, well, you're not very bright, you're not, and I've heard this. I hear this from patients. I hear this from supervisors. They think actually they're a little bit less knowledgeable. And I think that's a real problem that non-UK doctors have, non-UK qualified doctors have. The social capital they bring might be deemed to be a little bit less than actually what we should be talking about. So I think for all kinds of reasons, we need to help both educators and supervisors, but also we need to help our residents as well. And in fact, that's part of the work we do with induction for doctors coming from abroad. many deaneries now will do this as part of that induction. They do a cultural communication induction. So they talk about issues around language and communication, and maybe some of the difficulties it can create.
Vijay, I wonder if I could just, as you spoke about earlier on, you really sparked a real story for me. In a hospital I worked in, we had a registrar came from European country, and very quickly the nurses had written her off. And the challenge was she'd pick up the phone on our assessment unit, and somebody would be speaking to her in a version of English she's never heard before called Yorkshire, with a very strong accent. And she'd have to convert that Yorkshire accent into English, but then she'd have to convert it, to think about it, into a native language. So she fought in a native language and then had to come back into English and stuff. So when the nurses say, right, what's happening, quick, and she spoke an accent, very quickly she was labelled as poor. And to the point that one consultant wrote an email to the team, which was really inappropriate, saying, I don't want this person should be in the middle grade rota. When you actually stopped and understood that and listened to her, and he listened to her judgment and assessment, so she felt confident, she was an outstanding clinician. And we label really quickly, what can we do better to, because we talked about how we can support doctors new to UK and the culturally and induction. Induction's it's a transition, isn't it? It's bigger than just, it's a continuous process.
It's a process.
Yeah. What can we do for people listening who are UK residents, UK consultants, leaders, to help with this?
So that's a great question, Simon, and thank you for that story. I think that just epitomizes the issues that non-UK graduates have. When we start thinking about how we help, the first thing we need to do, and this is the help of linguists actually have helped us analyze language and make it so that we can actually talk about it in a way that we can actually do something about helping both the faculty and residents. So they talk about language having three components. So the first component is the linguistics. So vocabulary, the grammar, syntax, etc. There's a second component, which is sociolinguistic aspects of language. Now, the sociolinguistic aspects are to do with the manner in which you say something. So that could be the tone, intonation, where you put the stress on different parts of a word, the speed you speak at, and turn taking. So in some languages, they kind of overlap. So Italian is the example where one person will not finish speaking, the other will start. So they seem like they're arguing, but they're not. They are just following the rules of just overlapping slightly. Whereas English is very much, I finish, your turn, my finish, your turn. So, but if you're used to a culture where you have a bit of overlapping, you can see how that seems like someone's interrupting you because I haven't finished yet, but actually they're not. So being aware of language, linguistics, the sociolinguistics aspects, but then there's a third component, which is important for doctors, which is the applied language skills. And these applied language skills are to do with consultation skills, communicating with doctors, patients, communicating with doctors at handover, for example, communicating in MDT meetings. Now, these are skills. Now, if your cognitive load is being taken up, like your European doctor, with 1 and 2, with the language and the sociolinguistics, you can see how that applied language may deteriorate. My example is riding a bicycle. So if you spend all your energy and your balance and focus, as we all do when we start to learn to ride a bicycle, on keeping balance and upright and not falling over, you tend to lose sight of where you're going and you go over the place. And in a way, that's what happens when you start working in a new culture, that if you are having to translate and think in a different language and translate it back and so forth, I think that can create problems in the workplace. It can create problems with meetings, supervisory meetings, MDT meetings, and most of all, it can create issues in exams, especially those exams where there is an oral component to this. Many colleges will have exams now with that component. So you can see how that can create difficulties. So I think the first part of the answer to your question, Simon, is awareness. We need to raise awareness. And I do, but I talk to trainees about this. I tell them that this is what's going on. And then they kind of, yeah, that's what's going on. So that's why I'm having these difficulties. Then you can start trying to address those. And if it is a problem with language and linguistics or whatever, then you can perhaps, think about how you expose yourself more to the language so you get more familiar. We used to say, and I'm not saying this is a good thing or bad thing, but, is watch some of the soaps on TV, for example, just to get used to that. I knew in some cases, that you go to the local cafe with your trainee and resident and get them exposed to the local language and the local Yorkshire accent or whatever it may be, so you get yourself familiarized, and then very soon you will pick up those nuances and euphemisms that you have. So that's the first bit of it for me, is that just being aware, and then picking up a little bit more about communication skills specifically. I think there are things that we can do to help with that. Many non-UK graduates will not have been exposed to consultation skills or communication skills. I remember doing many talks. I remember doing some of the Romanian doctors would come over, and communication, consultation model, no, that's not something that we've ever been taught. All we know is the medical model, and we apply it, and that's how it is. And then that has issues, because here we'd like to teach communication skills, consultation skills. We have Calgary-Cambridge model, or the neighbour model, or whichever one you want to follow. So if you start talking at that level to people never getting exposed to that, it's never going to land. So I strip it back. I say, look, let's not try to put upon you a new model of consultation, because under moments of pressure, workload, stress, exam situation, you're going to revert to what you're comfortable with, which ain't going to be your new model, is it? It's going to be something you're familiar with. So and that's the first take-home message, let's build on your assets. What do you do well? And let's build on that. Let's not talk about deficits and how we correct something. This is not correctional. This is how we build. It's asset-based. How do we build on your existing knowledge and skills to improve them, to help you work better, improve your performance in the culture that's required, really, this new culture that you're working in. So for me, it's about stripping it back and say, right, you've got your medical knowledge, that's great. But think about a consultation as having simple, really, it's not rocket science, having a beginning, a middle, and an end. Beginning to gather information, middle to do some examination, and end to some kind of management plan. And as we know this, medicine consultation models are designed because it's not about problem solving at this stage. Actually, for us as doctors, it's about problem setting. Because once we have an idea what the problem could be, or 2 or 3 things the problem could be, we have an idea what we can do next to either confirm or refute that diagnosis or that hypothesis, that impression. So you can do tests, I can do this, and that. I've got a pathway to go down. But actually the problem is right at the beginning. What is a problem I'm dealing with? Because patients don't come with problems, diseases, diagnosis. They come with illness. So the second message I give to doctors, trainees, residents is think about disease versus illness model. We talk about that. Doctors as diagnosed diseases, patients come with illness. And the consultation is weaving from one to the other. Patient's agenda, doctor's agenda, going to the patient. How is that? What symptoms you have? How is it affecting you? How's that illness affecting your activities of daily living? How's it affecting work or social life or whatever it may be? And then back to the doctor. Need to ask you a few more specific things about those symptoms so I can try to hone it down. So getting that first, beginning, middle, and end. Second, think about problem setting, not problem solving. Think about disease versus illness. Those simple messages that they can incorporate into their consultation model, I think, can be really helpful. So not just going down that route of medical management. And the other thing that we talked, and Simon, we talked about this before, and Amie as well, about hierarchy. Because some cultures have quite a hierarchical structure. That works, that's fine, great. But in this country, it's a little bit flatter. Now, if you're used to a hierarchical culture, you're going to be very doctor-centered. Patients aren't going to be involved in asking their view about, if you ask a patient, if you're from that kind of culture, what do you think is going on? How do you think you can be helped? They'll say, well, you're the doctor. And suddenly they'll get very frightened that you don't know what to do. But in this case, it's an idea of involving the patient decision-making and all that stuff, patient-centered care. So thinking about hierarchy and also thinking about in the other side to hierarchy is when you come to work in a ward, you might be waiting for instructions because you're from a culture that you're told what to do, you don't use initiative, otherwise you're in trouble. Whereas here, it's much more self-directed, show your initiative, etc. So you can see how that can create some dissonance and how that can create difficulties. So talking about this openly, how your culture, what you're used to, can affect the way you learn, you teach, you consult. These are important things. Consent taking. Some cultures, and elderly parents say, no, you talk to my son, my daughter. My dad used to do this all the time to me, I mean, he's passed now, but when we used to have some heart problems and things and go to hospital and just ask my son, not because he's a doctor, because he's my son, he will tell you what I need kind of thing. And that's how it was. So if you're used to that, you talk to the rallies. GMC, consent taking, have you got consent from the patient to talk to the relatives? So you can see how that can create, and I've seen this happen. I mean, I'm sure you, in your experience, might have seen that happen as well, where residents come a cripple when they start doing that because that's not what they were used to. So thinking about hierarchy, how you talk to patients, how you talk to your peers, that's an element, communication in the broader sense. So in terms of how you help that, just making people aware of that, pointing them to ethical frameworks we work in, consent taking, GMC, all that stuff really helps early on if we can talk to our patients, our doctors about this. And then once we talk,
Vijay,
yeah.
Can I just come in and ask another question?
Yeah.
Because you're clearly passionate about this. You see it, you have confidence to have questions, to be curious. For many supervisors and colleagues, they may feel discussing culture and language is potentially I could be myself in trouble or be, of course, offense or stuff. What advice would you give to somebody saying, I want to know more, but I don't know how to do that sensitively?
Again, that's a really good question, and it's one I'm asked frequently when we talk about this. And the thing is that not to be afraid, to be brave. Let's get uncomfortable in being comfortable, if you like, because we do need to ask these questions. So the way I approach this, and the residents and junior doctors, they will not mind because I will ask them at that first meeting with them. I'll share things about me and where I come from, my culture, what I'm used to. But what I'd really like to know is about your journey as well. Not because you're different. I'm not using it as a microaggression. I'm not pointing you out as you're different. I want to know because if I get to know what kind of training you've had, what you're used to, what cultural norms you're used to, how, for example, are you used to receiving feedback? Are you used to quite direct feedback, confrontational feedback in some cases, or are you used to a more indirect way of receiving feedback? I talked to someone the other day, and she was saying to me, I've got a real problem. She says that she runs a small company to support doctors and students. And so one of the doctors that we are working from, he's really rude to the trainees and the students and direct with them. And I said, well, how's his outcomes? He said, they love him. He's brilliant because the cultures they've come from, they're used to that direct feedback. And he's one of their best facilitators. So asking a trainee, are you used to that direct? Actually, and if you're armed to that information, then you almost have that permission to talk to them in that way as well, because that's what they're used to. But that first contact, as we know, relationships are the currency of training. So that relationship, that first contact with your trainee, and just putting aside those, I don't want to offend someone, I don't want to, but if you make your intentions clear, that the reason we're talking about this is so that we know how we both work, that I can learn about, because I'm aware that culture has an impact on learning and training. So I want to know from you what you're used to. What are the things that you've been exposed to? How do you like to be told instructions? Well, what about, if we give you some challenges and help you with self-directed learning so you get to develop that? The other element to that is not just the oral verbal stuff, it's also the written stuff. You might have never written a reflective entry in your life.
Reflective practice.
Reflective practice. What is that? Might be quite a, what does that mean? So actually demystifying that. What does that actually mean? So simple models on how you can do a reflective entry can be helpful in that situation as well. What does that mean? And we can talk about how you, with trainees, how you can do reflective entries and help them with e-portfolio and just prepare them. So you're just building on their assets to help them prepare for working as a resident in the training structures we have. So my message is, be brave, make your intentions clear. We judge ourselves by our intentions, we judge others by their behaviors. But if you make your intentions clear, then that behavior becomes clear. So that's what I would say to supervisors. Don't feel afraid to ask them. But it's reciprocal. Share, actually, mind you. And in fact, sharing, people see you as supervisor, whatever, at the peak of, your career, whatever. What they haven't seen is the struggles you've got to get there. And we've all had struggles to get there. We've all had missteps, wrong judgments, wrong turns, not got our jobs. But actually sharing that, the humility to share that with your resident, actually is quite powerful. I found that you can say, actually, I've been in that situation. I've been in an uncomfortable situation where you may find yourself. I've been at situations where that exam didn't go quite right for me. I didn't get that job. So let's share those experiences as a two-way thing, not just as a one-way thing. Does that answer that question, Simon?
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. There's so many things I want to pick up on there, but the first thing that I just want to echo is the vulnerability. And I think when we are vulnerable, that can be incredibly powerful, and it really can help people share their story, can't it? It's really interesting when you are vulnerable with some non-UK graduates that they see it in very different ways from depending what country they have trained in. And in some countries, vulnerability is deemed as a negative. And it's really interesting. And then some countries, it's deemed as a positive. So I think that's also, if we are going to share that, to be aware of that.
Incredibly important point, Amy. Yeah. And you've just reminded me of another word, I think, which is shame.
Yeah, absolutely.
That vulnerability and shame you feel because you can't, and Amy, it leads to imposter syndrome. That's a talk in itself, but it makes you feel that, I'm not good enough. I shouldn't be here. Someone's going to tap on my shoulder and revoke my visa and send me back. And that's a real vulnerability that they feel. So thank you for raising that, Amy. I think that's a really important point.
And it's about empowering the individual as well, isn't it? And, knowing how to do that in a safe space for them and for us as well. I still find the best, I work with huge numbers of non-UK graduates, and going for a coffee or a cup of tea, it honestly, you cannot underestimate the power of that, because you just sit and chat about life or what you did at the weekend. And I have learned so much. I got a message last night from a fellow consultant who trained overseas, and she keeps asking me to recommend television shows for her to watch to try and help her figure out the I guess the culture. So actually that's a really good way as well, is highlighting and trying to find different television shows or podcasts or radio shows that people can listen to. Moving on from that, the other thing I wanted to touch on is non-verbal communication. So you talked a lot about verbal and the tone, but how about, because a lot of communication is non-verbal. So is that something that's...
Yeah, so that falls in that
noticed can be-
sociolinguistic aspect of language. So
Yeah.
we talked about linguistics, sociolinguistics applied. So it's the sociolinguistics covers the non-verbal. And really easy to misinterpret things. I mean, some things are going to be a little bit generic. You know in yourself when someone's got shut down, when they're not quite listening to you, they're not interacting, you know they haven't quite got the message. So the important thing is to pick up on that, pick up on when someone's not quite getting what you're saying. I think that's really important. But also not to assume that a nod is assent, not to assume that a shake of the head is no, because that can be yes. And I find myself doing that because my culture is Indian, so I will sometimes fall into that, especially with friends, and we start, going into that non-verbal. In some cultures, a thumbs up actually is a rude sign. In some cultures, the okay sign signifies something much ruder. So it's really important and it's always stripping back non-verbal to make sure that you're not interpreting. And if you're not sure, then have the cultural humility to ask, does that have a meaning? Does that mean something to you? And so forth. So, but the obvious ones, I think you can pick up, and there may be some additions, but those are just human signs of when you know yourself, when you've got rapport with someone within a second, or you've got a connection with someone, or whether they're not listening to you, or whatever else it may be. So non-verbal is really important, and also you've just reminded me of another aspect of language, which is to do with low context, like high context. So when you talk about low context cultures, language cultures, such as in England or US, yes means yes, no means no, and that's how it is. But in high context cultures, the message is also wrapped up in how it's said. So it is the non-verbal aspects of how you say that yes or no. And it's also, so the nonverbal is also tied up in that you give the context of that answer. So it might seem like they're going around the bush a bit, giving you an answer, but they're not. They are just giving you the context of why that answer is yes or no, whatever. So in a high context culture, yes may mean yes, it may mean maybe, it may mean no. So just being aware that some cultures, and we know this ourselves, some cultures, they tend to, give you the full context. Some will be more direct. And that's just how it is. That's your norms. But part of that is the non-verbal way that message is conveyed is really important. So that's a really important point as well.
Thank you, Vijay. We'll come towards the end. I think we could keep talking forever because it's fascinating. And I love your work in this space and what you brought to our group. I ask everybody this question at the end of a podcast, which is, if you could go back in time with all your wisdom you have now and give yourself some advice as a 23-year-old new doctor, what advice would you give yourself?
That's a really good question. One which I haven't thought of. Well, the first thing I'd say is buy some shares in Zoom. Or Teams or Microsoft in the last century.
Chat GPT.
I love that. Yeah.
Something like that. And for me, though, I think, I hate to say that, I was a bit cocky, I think. So I think humility. I think that's the one thing I would say to my younger self is, just, you don't know everything. Just, a bit more humility would be a good thing. as you go through life. And you learn these lessons as you go through life, don't you? And plenty of things I've learned. And the other one key thing I've learned, especially as I've got older, is that leadership isn't about your titles. It's not about the job you hold or your standing or how many letters you have. It's about your values, because it's those core values that have always been there that drive you in whatever you do. They drive your behavior and they drive your leadership. And so that's what people are seeing as your behavior. But so think about the core values that drive your behavior. And maybe that's what I would say to my youngers. What are the core values that drive you? And think and work on them. Because, you know, putting a spotlight on some of those negative ones actually can help you change, which is difficult. And that we know that when we talk about hearts and minds, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about nudging the dial on values. How do you change someone's values to help them change ideas, to change their behaviors? And, you know, we see that all the time. So that's a more considered answer.
Thank you. I like them all. Amie, we're coming to the end. I don't know if you've had any thoughts. You've been listening away.
Well, do you know what I've made? Because I'm still not really with favour their computer. Look at all these notes I've made.
We could hear you shuffling around.
I just love it. I have to. I guess I write notes. So there's so many things. I guess the takeaway ones for me is what really resonated was, why do we try and change individuals' approach to consultations? Let's build on what they have existing, because it can be really challenging to try and change. If you've been a doctor for a long time, let's build on the assets, you know, and go strip it back, beginning, a middle and an end, and really what's build on what they have inbuilt already. I think that's really, really essential. And I guess the really key thing that I liked as well is the 3 types of linguistics. So the language, the socio-linguistics, so looking at the non-verbal and the postures, and then how we apply our language skills, so consultation skills, and how we may adapt into different areas and different walks of life and how we talk. And I guess finally, I'm going to end on just one little question, because I want to ask both of you this. How do we introduce ourselves to patients at work, and how should we tell non-UK graduates how to introduce themselves? Because I get asked this question all the time. So what's your official stance, Vijay?
I'm not sure there is an official stance.
I've always asked it. And
so, I mean, the first thing is asking the resident, how do you like to be called? Get their view. What do you think would be the most appropriate way that you would like people to call you? And some people do use shortened names, and they will have nicknames. And you know, my wife has a name, but at birth she was given a nickname, and that's the name she has because that's what happened in India. You know, that's how you are. So you're given little nicknames and things. So you just ask the person, how do you like to be known? So that's the first thing. But the second thing is then say, you know, I don't know what more to say on that, really. I
guess it's how we I guess it's how we introduce ourselves to patients. Because
but not just patients, Amie. It's how we introduce people to the team, and we think about inclusion.
Exactly.
And we heard Namita Kumar about saying at the start of the day, again, everybody introduced, and using everybody's right name.
Right names, yeah.
Because sometimes we end up using the surname when they should use the front name, but also how to pronounce it. We feel awkward, but I make a real effort to say, if I get this wrong, please correct me because it matters. And if you don't make that effort, it shows it doesn't really matter. And I think your name is probably the most important thing to get right. What with patients, groups, teaching. I would have to call time there, Amie. Do you want to take us out?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think that's a really good point to end on, actually, is sometimes the most simple things can be some of the most difficult, actually. A massive thank you, Vijay. That was a really, really interesting talk. And I'm sure that our listeners out there will love listening to that. For everybody out there, please rate, review and subscribe, and download this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.